Okay, we are live. And John is just joining us. Hello, John.
Hi, Albert. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I cannot see you.
It won't start the video.
Okay, so keep on trying.
Okay.
I'm sure you'll make it work eventually.
Joan, Joan, if you've been using Microsoft Teams just beforehand, it sometimes knocks out the settings.
Yeah.
I find
Yes,
that
I
on
read
the
something
parliamentary
about that.
machines.
Hang on, I think I might have it.
Actually, there is something also with Google now. Teams on Google will disallow Zoom, interestingly enough.
Yeah, it just keeps saying no when I try and turn the camera on.
Might need to restart.
Yeah.
Do you want to restart your computer, John?
Okay, I'll have a go.
We are going to start, and then you join us, and you will have plenty of time to say what you need to.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so we'll see you very shortly, John.
Okay, thank you.
So let me start with Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister of Australia. Tony, you were appointed recently as a trade advisor to the UK government to advise them, I guess, on Brexit. So tell us a little bit more about that, and how was your appointment received both in Australia and in the UK?
Thanks, Albert. The appointment was to be an advisor to the Board of Trade. Now, the Board of Trade is not actually dealing with Brexit. Brexit is being dealt with in the Brexit portfolio. The Board of Trade is looking after Britain's trade with non-EU countries. But nevertheless, it is very difficult to talk about trade in this area without also looking at Brexit, given that to some extent the terms of Brexit will facilitate or hinder the terms of other trade arrangements that Britain might make. Can I just say, as a friend of Britain, who wants the best possible outcome for Britain, because I think that's in the best interests of Australia and indeed the rest of the world, I do hope that the EU will swiftly conclude a Canada-style free trade deal with the United Kingdom, because such a deal would be in Britain's best interests, it would be in the EU's best interests, because it would preserve all of the economic benefits that Britain being in the EU currently confers on both Britain and the EU itself, while at the same time giving Britain freedom from the sort of political directives which proved so chafing to a majority of the British people. And if it's good enough for the EU to do it with Canada, why isn't it good enough for the EU to do it with the United Kingdom? Let's face it, what the United Kingdom has now with the other countries of the EU is tariff and quota free entry of goods, mutual recognition of credentials and standards, and it has free-ish movement of people. There's no reason why that ought not be continued. And let's hope that the EU negotiators in the end see what's in their best long-term interests as well as the best long-term interests of the United Kingdom. Let's hope their continuing angst over Britain having the temerity to leave doesn't cause them to end up punishing themselves in their attempt to punish Britain. That said, Albert, I don't think the British people should be scared of a no-deal Brexit. Let's face it, Australia does $100 billion worth of trade a year with the EU on WTO rules. And the EU doesn't trade with Australia because it loves us. It trades with Australia because it's in the EU's interest to do so. Likewise, EU countries don't buy British goods because they love Britain. They buy British goods because it's in their interest to do so, and vice versa. So that should continue and will continue substantially even under WTO rules. If I have one observation as a well-disposed outsider, having looked at this whole EU thing now for years, there are still vast swathes of the British establishment set in this declinist mode of thinking. It was declinism that took Britain into the EU. It was declinism that I think motivated much of the Remain sentiment. And I think that since the Brexit vote, large numbers of people in Britain have almost been desperate for Brexit to fail in order to justify the position that they took going into that vote. Now, Brexit is going to happen. Let's hope it's the best possible Brexit. And I just hope, I just think that the sooner everyone in Britain accepts that Brexit is happening and tries to make the most of it, the best for everyone.
So I believe the Brexit talks have collapsed yesterday, I've heard.
Well, Joan and Stephen would be more up to speed than that with that than I am. But
okay, but before
that was certainly the report in the Australian newspapers this afternoon.
Before we go there, you are advising on the trades with non-EU countries, so that would include the United States. So how do you think the change of administration may affect Britain? Because I believe that Trump was quite keen to do a free trade agreement with the UK. And what is happening on that score? Is it still in the making?
In the end, countries do these deals because it's in their interest to do so. Is it in the interests of the United States to have a better trading arrangement with Britain? Yes, it is, and vice versa. So, look, I think that America will do a deal with Britain. Canada will do a deal with Britain. Australia will do a deal with Britain. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I just hope that they're done swiftly. And I think the best way to ensure that they are done swiftly is for the respective would-be trade partners to focus very much on trade and not to get too distracted by other issues. I've got to say, for 10 years, it took Australia a long time to sort out our deals with China, Japan, and South Korea. And one of the reasons why that was the case, particularly under the former Labor government, was that our negotiators were at least as focused on labour market issues as they were on trade issues. I think that if you trust a country enough to do a trade deal with it, you ought to trust it enough to sort out its own safety standards, its own labour market issues, and dare I say it, its own environmental issues.
So, Stephen, what is the climate like, the political climate now that you had a whole year, I should say. It was about a year ago that Boris Johnson won the elections. What is it like now, a year later? How is the opposition? How is it working in Parliament? Are you getting legislation through? Because at some stage, nothing was happening, I believe, in the last year in the UK. Are you back to normal, do you feel?
Good morning, Albert. Thank you very much for inviting me onto the panel. No, we are a long way from normal right now. I'll answer your questions in a moment. If I could just come back on some of the remarks made by Tony Abbott just then. I completely agree with Tony's sentiments there about the optimism and the need to be upbeat about the future and about our international trade. He's also correct in what he said about large swathes of elite opinion in the UK, whether that's in academia, in the legal circles, and here in Westminster, in the heart of the political bubble. Large swathes of opinion who've wanted to see Brexit fail. and to see Britain fail in this venture. Now, that's not where I'm coming from. It's not where Boris and his team are coming from. And they secured a mandate. We, as the Conservative Party, secured a mandate 12 months ago from the British people to precisely unblock the kind of scenario I think you were describing a few moments ago, Albert, when you said that there was a time when nothing was getting through Parliament. Everything felt like it was gummed up and stuck. Well, that was the Parliament that existed from 2017 through to last December under Theresa May, and no fault of her own, but she didn't have an overall majority in Parliament. There was this constant to and fro battle between those people who believed in implementing the Brexit referendum result and those people who decided that they were going to fight tooth and nail to stop Brexit happening, regardless of what the British people had voted for. So right here, where we are right now, we've completed stage one of the Brexit process. The United Kingdom has left the legal construct of the European Union. What the last 12 months have mainly been about, aside from dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, most of this last year for Boris Johnson and his team have been dealt with has been around trying to secure this free trade agreement now with the European Union. I think that's important. I remain optimistic and hopeful that a deal will be struck. This week is the critical week. There'll be a phone call later today, probably early evening, between the Prime Minister and the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. They will make one last ditch attempt to see whether the divisions and the gaps between the EU and the British negotiating teams can be bridged, whether there's a compromise to be done, and we will know within a few days whether a free trade deal is going to be struck. But my own view is whether or not this opportunity is seized this week, there will need to be agreements between the UK, the independent UK outside of the EU, will need to have long-term agreements in place sooner or later with the EU. The idea that the fifth largest economy on earth, the UK, sitting just 25 miles off the coast of what is probably the world's largest, most integrated trading bloc, the EU, the idea that we coexist alongside each other without any kind of deals in place or agreements around how we trade with each other, how we pass manufactured goods between each other, our agricultural produce, that's just not realistic. Sooner or later, pen will need to be put to paper, deals will need to be struck, and we will need to work out what our long-term relationship is outside the EU. Now, I hope that a big chunk of that problem gets sorted this week when the EU and the UK hopefully sign a deal.
Very good. John, what is your view about all of this?
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me on the panel, Albert. It's a real pleasure to be part of the dialogue again. And hello to Stephen, who I've not seen for a while, and a particular hello to Tony, who I've not seen for
G'day, Joan.
A good year. Hi. And let me start by saying I wish Tony well in his endeavours on behalf of the UK. And I mean that, Tony. We need those trade deals. You know that, and we know that. So you and your colleagues, I believe a former colleague of mine is on that committee with you, that advisory board with you, Patricia Hewitt. So I hope we see some good results from that. It'd be hard to imagine a more difficult backdrop to Brexit than an international pandemic. And certainly the UK has suffered terribly in this pandemic with huge loss of life. And it's had a really big impact on our economy. But nobody could predict that such a thing was going to happen. And certainly nobody would want such a thing to happen. I think looking back, we've got some really important lessons to learn. And I think I'll start with the lessons to learn rather than finish in order to put my cards on the table. Certainly, I was a Remainer, as Tony will remember from a previous dialogue spar that we had on this matter. Excuse me. But now it's not about remain or leave. It now is very much about deal or no deal. And very shortly, we will be in that future and we'll know whether we got that deal. I think the lesson learned, and it's a hard lesson, I think, for people who were dismayed at leaving the EU and were Remainers, but it's a really important lesson probably for everybody, is that if you go to the people and you ask them their view, and you don't set a threshold, you ask them their view, and their view comes back, which was leave, then you have to accept that. And I think we were so worried about Remain, about leaving, and as Joe Biden has named it, an act of self-harm, that we could not move away from that position. But we should have done. We definitely should have done. Now, we did to a degree, and we voted, many of us, a big majority, for Article 50, which triggered the 2-year process. But I think a change came around the Lancaster House speech that Theresa May made, which it introduced really, or made the commitment to a very hard Brexit. And I'm not sure that that is really what the British people voted for. But from that was a springboard for the strength of the People's Vote campaign. And from that point on, things became very much more polarised. And I know that, they say nothing is inevitable until it happens. And that's true to a degree, that is true. But we do all have agency in this. And I think what's most important of all is what's happened to our politics throughout all of this. And you think of the extraordinary events, Parliament, the Theresa May government being held in contempt of Parliament, the first time in history that's happened. We've seen 3 prime ministers, two come and go and one still there. 3 general elections in 4 years and a referendum, completely defied anything the pollsters had to say. And then we had Boris being told that he had given unlawful advice to the Queen. So we've had some tumultuous and extraordinary events in Parliament. But I think what's most of all worrying is the adversarial nature of our politics, the intolerance of any compromise, and the pushing politicians to extreme positions that the voters who put them there don't actually hold. So having said that, I think there's lessons to be learned about accepting what the public tell you, working positively for it, and being able to compromise. Beyond that, the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, makes it very clear that a no-deal Brexit is a much, much worse scenario for us than a deal. Even the Canada-style deal, which is what's on the table now, this is a choice between no deal and a bare bones deal. But the Canada-style deal, which will get rid of most tariffs and will still leave quotas, but will be far better positioned than no deal at all. I think it's right. We have to try for that. We absolutely have to try and make that happen. But I think it is, it should be of concern that we now have very high unemployment, 1.62 million unemployed. All economists are saying that's likely to reach 2.6 million by mid-2021. So we need to have these concerns for our economy. We know that our GDP has plummeted 22% in April, back down to dropping by 8% in September. So we are looking at some difficult economic scenarios. So I would say, in the light of what I've said about lessons learned, and in the concern we should have for the potential downside of Brexit, where nearly all economists say our economy will shrink and foreign investment will fall, it's not any longer appropriate to talk about the EU punishing us, about temerity, about declinism, about what people wanting Britain to fail. That injects our politics with a negative danger where compromise is not possible. Now, we need to see this go through Parliament. So I don't think that we're going to get the deal that is even possible unless we can be more temperate in our politics and in our relationship with the EU. And it doesn't matter what we say about trade deals with Australia and with America. And of course we want them, and of course they're important. But let's face the fact that 53% of our imports come from the EU, and we sell 45% of our goods into the EU. And these trade deals will matter that Tony's talking about, and Stephen, but in the short to medium term, if we don't get a deal, then we face a very, very difficult economic scenario. And I don't believe any of us, I always believe that 99.9% of politicians go into politics to make the world a better place, to change things for the better. And I believe that of all of us here on this panel. So we cannot want to inflict in the short or medium term any kind of real economic damage on the people of this country. Therefore, we need to learn to work together better. Maybe a good example will be Tony's trade advisory body that he's on, where he is working cross-party with other politicians.
Joan, you still have the fire, I can tell. John, so you resigned from Parliament, you resigned from your party in the last term because you didn't agree with your leader for reasons of principle that you may invoke if you want. So what are your personal intentions? Are you jumping back in? Are you supporting Keir Starmer? What do you think of the new leader that you have now?
Well, let me just say two things, because you reminded me there. I'm not absolving Jeremy Corbyn of any responsibility in this situation either, because you know, he did something that's unconscionable in a leader of a party when you're facing a referendum on something as huge as Brexit, and he sat on the fence. Unbelievable thing to do. He wasn't really campaigning for Remain. He was never a Remainer. Any other Labour leader probably would have managed to get a result that was the reverse of the result we got. But I think it would have always been close. There was huge division on this issue. So he along with all his other crimes, was totally irresponsible as a leader of Her Majesty's opposition. Keir Starmer, I think Keir Starmer is a good and decent man. I think he genuinely wants to rid the Labour Party of anti-Semitism. I think he's probably finding that harder than he thought he might. Well, I don't know what he thought, I never asked him. But I think he's seeing that this is a very difficult thing to do. It's a fault line running very deep into the Labour Party. And it's not just, it's not anti-Semitism, it's anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. And unless we get a more balanced policy on the Middle East and stand up, you know, if he wants to tear out the roots of anti-Semitism, he's going to have to identify what those roots are. And they run deep on these matters. I'm sorry, Tony, I'm not keeping you up, am I?
All right, no, sorry, Joan. Sorry, Joan. I didn't think you could see me. I didn't think you could see me.
You're always in my sights, Tony Abbott.
It's 10:30 here in Australia in the evening.
Yes, we're getting there.
I'm so sorry. I am keeping you up.
But we have to stay up to talk to you guys.
But so I think Keir Starmer, you know, his great big positive is that I think he is a good and decent man. His other great big positive is he's not Jeremy Corbyn. There's a long way to go, and it's a little premature. I want to see the Labour Party back as a decent and strong party, not just because I think, you know, oh, I'd like Labour to be that, but because it's part of our democracy that when you go to the electorate, there's a real choice. And I frankly think there was no choice at the last general election. For the first time in my life, I didn't vote Labour. And I think an awful lot of people, yes, a lot of people supported Boris and he got a very good, huge majority, but an awful lot of people felt there was nobody else they could vote for. So I think in the interests of democracy, which rests upon some kind of multi-party, a choice notion, I want to see Keir Starmer continue to move the Labour Party back to the traditional Labour values that meant people like me could be part of it. But I'm not the litmus test for this, Albert. The litmus test will be how the Jewish community feel about it.
But as far as you're concerned, you're not prepared to jump back yet.
It's premature. That question.
Good on you, Joan, for being so principled, if I may say.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you.
You were a beacon of light in the last Parliament, Joan. You really were.
Thank you. I mean, you know, I don't regret any of it because I have to live with myself and look myself in the mirror. But, you know, it was a huge wrench. It was not an easy thing to do.
So what's your view, John, about the way that the pandemic has been handled so far by the Conservatives?
I think the worst thing about it in terms of the government handling of it has just been the confusion around the various rules, the things you can and cannot do. I mean, I think it's like a lot of the British people, I think they don't really want to be overly critical when we're in the midst of a crisis. They want to be supportive, I think, of what their government has to do. And I think that's a great quality in a crisis, you pull together. I think there have obviously been problems. The very good news is where they're at with the vaccine. The very bad news is that we have one of the worst loss of life across Europe and one of the biggest hits on our economy. I'm sure that, you know, the Bank of England governor has made it clear that Brexit uncertainty has fed into that as well. It's hard to separate these things out at the moment. I think there's things that could have been an awful lot better. Provision of PPE, the spending of money in an unaccountable way, I think somewhat goes against the grain for the British Parliament and British democracy, as I'm sure it does for most of the similar kind of Western style democracies. So I think there are worries there. And I think there were some big mistakes made at times that was symbolic rather than anything like the visit of Dominic Cummings to Durham. I mean, it seems like a kind of, well, you know, it's not caused instant loss of life or anything, but actually it's quite a symbolic thing about whether people adhere to the lockdown rules and the tiered rules, and that can lead to loss of life. So I think one can well understand why people want to go and visit family, for goodness sake. But, you know, if you're in a leadership position, which he was, although not elected, then, and you're making the rules, then you absolutely have to adhere to them and be seen to. So I think there have been mistakes, but I think they were right in the first lockdown to bring it in. It was very lengthy. British people were amazing, being able to get through 3 months of that. And it certainly brought the rate down. I think Eat Out to Help Out has proved to be less of a success in that it stimulated some business in the hospitality industry, which has suffered very badly, but I'm not sure exactly how you could avoid some of that. But it also increased the rate again of transmission. So I don't think it's an easy thing to handle, and I think there'll be post-mortem on all this after, when we get through this. But the good news is certainly the vaccine.
And Stephen, you have your the Speaker of Parliament, who is from your party, I believe. He was quite critical about the way democracy has been damaged.
So, Albert, we have a new speaker now in the House of Commons. I think you might be referring to the old speaker who was from my party and was very vocal and critical about Brexit. But as part of the big change that happened in our politics 12 months ago, we have a new speaker who's actually from the Labour Party.
I
And
see.
if I can say, he's gone down like a breath of fresh air amongst all sides in the House of Commons. He's helped achieve a new tone in our politics, and that's a very positive thing.
I agree, Stephen. Absolutely.
And so, Stephen, how do you see the pandemic working out? Were you happy with the measures that your government? I know it's hard to be in government and be critical about your government, but were you satisfied with the way things were handled?
So that's a huge question, Albert. And,
I know.
I'm one of those members of Parliament, Conservative MPs, who, it's heartbreaking seeing businesses close down, people in my community lose their jobs because of the economic restrictions that we've put in place to try to tackle this pandemic. And myself and a large group of Conservative MPs, do want the government to strike the right balance between restrictions on our liberty, restrictions on economic activity, in order to try to stop the spread of the virus. But my goodness, we do need our economy to still function. Now, right at the start of the pandemic, I was very concerned that I thought too many businesses were being asked to close down. I thought too much of our economy ground to a halt right at the start of the pandemic. As a result, I thought too many people were put onto furlough, with the government effectively paying their wages. This year we're on course to borrow around £400 billion. That's the gap between how much money we've got coming in as a government and how much we're having to spend. And most of that is due to the one-off costs of COVID. Now, if you're a Conservative like I am, you believe that basically over the long term, governments ought to try and balance their books. That should be very, very concerning. But I don't think any government, whether you're looking in the States, in Europe, Asia, it's very, very hard to point to a government of a large, modern, complex economy like the one we have here in the UK and say, yeah, they're the ones doing it exactly right. The story in all of these countries have been one of kind of push and pull and argument about what the right spread of measures is. But look, we're ending this year, I believe, hopefully in a more optimistic position. We've got a vaccine coming on stream in a matter of days. I believe 2021 can be a really, really good year for the UK economy and for the global economy. I believe that we can have a really strong bounce back with the vaccines being rolled out all across the world, hopefully with more global trade restarting and economies opening up for business travel and for tourism. There's no reason why 2021 can't be a really good year.
Very good. I'd like to open for questions from the floor. So they are just starting to trickle in. Alan Howe, I don't know what happened to Alan, but never mind. So here we've got Christopher Pine asking a question. I wish I could give him the microphone for him to ask the question himself. Let me just read it for 1 second. Yes, so I have, as you guys know, I've got a bit of a sight issue, but Stephen, on the bottom of your screen, you've got a little Q&A. If you click on that, the question will appear and you can answer it.
So the question is, given that the UK turned its back on Australia and New Zealand in 1970 and embraced the common market that impacted on our economies, can you understand a certain sense of satisfaction in Australia that the UK now needs Australia to help lift them out of an economic hole of their own making? I won't respond exactly to the sentiment in that question, but there is no question that the central truth is right here, that for the first time in more than 40 years, the United Kingdom is having to look much further afield in terms of its own trade relations. And for the first time in more than 40 years, the UK on its own has to think through what it wants from its own trade policy. So for more than 2 generations, our trade policy has been effectively outsourced to the European Union. We have a huge opportunity now to recalibrate our trade policy. And that doesn't just mean doing a deal with the EU like we hope happens this week. It doesn't just mean rolling over the old trade agreements we had through the EU now for a UK context. It means building on that and building new trade agreements. So yes, as somebody who believes passionately that good trade policies can lift millions of people out of poverty and expand job opportunities around the world, I want to see the UK striking trade deals with Australia, with New Zealand, and with the US. And look, the note of realism to strike here is that in any trade deal, particularly large, complicated trade deals, there are trade-offs to be made. There are compromises. And we need to be clear as a country, what is it that we want to prioritize? What is it we want to try to secure new markets for? What are the areas that we want to be defensive about? Is that agriculture? Is it automotive? And the story of the last 4.5 years, as well as it being a story of political upheaval and push and pull, as we've tried to extricate ourselves from the EU on the back of the Brexit referendum, the story of the last 4.5 years, I also believe, has been a story of us working out what it is that we want from our new trading relationships. We're having to do a lot of new thinking for the first time, which is what's great that we've got people, experienced people like Tony Abbott, involved at the heart of decision making on things like this. It matters that we bring in people who've got experience around the world, because we're starting at a kind of low point of the curve, precisely because, as I say, for the last 40 years, we haven't been doing it as an independent government.
A question for Joan Ryan from Michael Leeson. Are the Conservatives who have breached the red wall consolidating or losing ground?
Recent polls, I think only last week, show that in those red wall seats, Labour is regaining its ground. I think they're seen at something like a 7% increase over this since Keir Starmer became leader of the Labour Party. So I think that will be, I suppose, what the Americans would call battlegrounds, the battleground states. They will be hard fought, very marginal seats. But there's a very long way to go, I think, to the next general election. So it's too soon to say what's going on and what the impact of coming through COVID and seeing Brexit happen, what the impact will that be? As you know, you can make predictions. We can obviously predict that there will be an end to COVID to some extent with the vaccination. However, I think, like the Governor of the Bank of England has said, and most leading economists, that COVID will have a much quicker and deeper impact, but we'll come out of it quicker as well. Whereas Brexit will be more of a slow burn and ultimately will be deeper in terms of its impact, but it'll take longer. It'll be over the next decade. So if we think there's a general election in roughly 4 years' time, we may well be halfway into that impact. Now, I actually do believe in being positive. I don't believe in being crazy optimistic. There's been a lot of predictions about sunny uplands, and I think there's a lot of mistrust in the public because of the kind of things they were promised in the referendum, the 350 million a week on the bus advert and all the rest of it, and that we'd have exactly the same trading ground as we have as members. And I think everybody now knows that's not the way it's going to be. But also, I think they don't necessarily believe those who predicted economic disaster or predict it now. And I suspect it'll be somewhere in between that. So I think all these things will have an impact. I don't think it's just Keir Starmer's leadership, though that is a big positive compared to the previous leader, that's improving the polling for Labour in those red wall seats. I think it is also feeling the effects of the last extraordinary year, and a pandemic such as COVID-19 is an extraordinary event. So I think it's very hard to know how this will pan out, and I think it will be related to how Brexit pans out. But I think inevitably there'll be some rebalancing in those seats when some of those voters come back. But for a lot of those voters, they voted Labour all their life. Now they've voted something different. That door's been opened. There's very much less core vote loyalty than there used to be. People are much more likely to try and weigh up each election and vote with what they think is in their best interest than what their family did for generations. So I think there is some recovery. I think there will be more, but I think much of it will depend on how Keir Starmer and the Labour Party behave and bring the Labour Party back to where it should be. And much of it will depend on the economic effect of Brexit. I don't think just sorting out the Labour Party will do it, because I think people need to feel they can vote for you, and that's where the Labour Party's, how it projects itself and what it says will matter. But I think people do these days are very, very conscious of the economic impact on them of whatever colour government is in power.
Albert, can I jump in there just very quickly?
Sure, Stephen, go ahead.
I agree with a lot of what Joan just said. I think that it's worth flagging there's another big challenge that the Labour Party has if it's ever going to form a majority again and put a Labour leader into Downing Street, in that it's almost impossible for the Labour Party to win a majority in the country unless it also does very well in Scotland. And what's happened in Scotland in the last 10 years is that huge blocks of the old Labour working class vote has gone to the Scottish Nationalist Party. And actually some has gone to the Scottish Conservative Party as well. There's been a hollowing out of the Labour Party's position in Scotland. And you have to believe in political miracles to see that vote going back to the Labour Party anytime soon. We are living in a time of huge political turbulence, so it could happen. But Scotland is a major political headache in the United Kingdom. It's a headache for the Labour Party. It's a headache for the Conservative Party. It's a headache for all of us. But I think in terms of the specific question about a Labour Party revival, it creates a huge obstacle for Keir Starmer.
But of course,
can we please not talk of Scotland as a headache? I mean, Scotland is an important part of the world's greatest ever union. And
I was born there.
I made the suggestion, Stephen, some time ago, sort of semi-tongue-in-cheek, but while the Palace of Westminster is being rebuilt, why doesn't the Parliament move to Glasgow or to Edinburgh? Because I can't think of anything that would better persuade the Scots that they are an integral part of the United Kingdom, that they're at the heart of this wonderful union, the greatest union the world has ever seen, than having the Parliament move from the home counties north of the Tweed. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing?
It would be fantastic, Tony. And look, you're exactly right. I was born in Scotland and I'm half Scottish, and so I kind of feel these things at an emotional level as well. And I didn't mean to imply that headache means that we don't absolutely value what we have.
And I accept that. I absolutely accept that, Stephen. I suppose I was just seizing on a loose word.
But
I don't think the MPs would ever vote to take the Parliament to Scotland. I mean,
but it wouldn't be forever. It wouldn't be forever. It would just be for 10 years or however long it is for the Parliament to be renovated.
They fear that. They've been very reluctant to vote to go anywhere different from the building that they're in, because I think they fear that they'll never go back. And a lot of them like to be in London.
But Tony's right, is that I think the issue there at the heart of the question is, how do we demonstrate from Westminster that Scotland matters to us? How do we project the relevance of the United Kingdom government?
Well, not with the internal markets bill, because they're not happy about that, are they? You're taking away their devolved powers. Are you voting on that today?
We will be voting on the internal market bill later on, yes. but I don't know if we're voting on those specific provisions. It's more about Northern Ireland.
Right, but the Scottish Parliament and Wales, well, Scottish Parliament, yeah, all the devolved parliaments and assemblies are really completely up in arms about it, aren't they? They say it overrides their powers. Far from saying they're important, you're saying you don't matter and your contribution is not valued.
No,
you know that the president of the Supreme Court, David Neuberger, he's criticised the clause that prevents any judicial review of this bill's operation. And he said, when you override the withdrawal agreement and break international laws and prevent any judicial review, he said, quote, "You are a dictatorship, you are in tyranny." I mean, that's pretty serious, isn't it? From the president of the Supreme Court. Yeah.
Well, I'm
Come to Melbourne, then you'll know what being in a dictatorship is. Only it's a health despotism.
Yeah.
Tony has a good point.
We've all been living in health dictatorships for the last few months.
We have an urgent question in the House of Commons later this afternoon about Hong Kong and young democracy activists being put in prison in Hong Kong for standing up for their freedoms. And
yeah, it's terrible.
I think they're probably using the word dictatorship more appropriately.
Talking about dictatorships, if I may just have one question on foreign affairs. What is the relationship like with China, especially since the UK now has overturned has put a ban, on the Huawei? You were going to actually adopt their 5G and then you decided not to. What's the relationship like with China? I can tell you in Australia, we are being bullied. Tony can tell you all about it. And just because we had the temerity of asking a question in terms of we want to understand what the hell happened in Wuhan, that question still has not been answered, because we are all being suffering around the world and we're all forgetting where that pandemic started. It started in Wuhan, and we want to know why. Our Prime Minister is very serious about wanting to have an answer on that. So because of that, Australia has been bullied. What is the situation in the UK?
Shall I go first, Albert?
Stephen?
Yes.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
There has been a political sea change. There's been a political sea change in my party, certainly, and probably elsewhere in British politics, about attitudes to China. 10 years ago, it was a big objective of the UK government to cozy up alongside China, become best friends with China for all of the economic benefits, the trading benefits that would supposedly bring. And the truth is, in the last few years, there's been a reevaluation of that. There's been a reevaluation of China, the role that China's playing in the world, the way that it tries to use its economic muscle to bully international institutions like the UN, to bully individual countries. We've just spoken about Hong Kong a few moments ago. Growing concern about some of China's security and diplomatic activities. And as part of that reevaluation, you referred to the Huawei decision, and there's been others. There's a kind of more pragmatic stepping back, I believe, by the UK from this very, very close relationship with China that we were pursuing. But that doesn't mean that we can pretend China doesn't exist. I mean, China will be one of the defining powers of the 21st century. We have complex manufacturing relationships with China and other trading relationships. And so it's about recalibrating that relationship to have a relationship that's more in our interests. And I think there's a huge scope, I think, for Britain working with democracy-loving international allies to be much firmer and to stand in solidarity with the people of Hong Kong, but also stand up to China on some of these other issues that we've seen coming across the world stage. I think there needs to be a harder, more pragmatic, more cold, hard-headed look at relations with China in the years ahead.
Alan Howe, you are back.
I am.
Very good.
Can I ask, with the sea lanes in the South China Sea are as important to European trade as they are to ours. is the UK Defence Forces in any position at all to assist with their security?
HMS Queen Elizabeth is supposed to be going there shortly, as I understand it, Alan.
Well, I was reading today in the Australian how the budget for the Defence Forces has been run down, Tony, in the UK, and that they're not really in a position to flex much muscle.
I think, and Stephen, you'd be more familiar with this than I am, but it was just a week or so back that the government announced a massive increase in defence spending, a very substantial increase in defence spending, including, I think, a very substantial increase in spending on the Royal Navy. So, look,
exactly right.
In fact, a wonderful thing that should have happened before. I think there's going to be a reduction in the foreign aid budget and quite a significant increase in the defence budget. And there's little doubt that the presence of the British Armed Forces is a wonderful force for good wherever they are.
Yeah, Tony, you're exactly right. Boris Johnson announced 2 weeks ago a very significant increase in defence spending, including the manufacture of a new generation of ships, adding to the naval fleet. And as we've seen in recent years, the South China Sea is an arena of growing interest for ours, for yours, for the US Defence Forces as well.
Very well. This is the last session for the day. For Tony and I, it's already 11 p.m. Time for bed, Tony.
If you say so, Albert.
The night is young. The night is young.
The night is young. And
your place or mine,
on your personal
we've been going since 6 p.m. here. That's been 5 good hours. And we are going to do it again tomorrow. So to all of you, I want to thank you. Do you want to have some parting comments, Joan and Stephen and Tony? Let me give you the opportunity of having some parting comments.
Who's starting? Am I?
Yes, you are.
Well, I would repeat what I said. I wish Tony well. It's in all our interests that these trade deals happen. I very much hope that we get a trade deal with the EU. I think we have to be less polarized and more able to work together, and much less feeling like we've got to keep selling one end of the scale or the other. We've got to sell how awful it all is or how great it's all going to be, because in actual fact, it's not going to be either of those things. It's going to be somewhere much more in the middle of those things. So I hope our politics can get back to more normal times. And I don't just blame Brexit for this. Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party before Brexit, before that referendum. And he's a big part in helping to usher into our political life this appalling populism. But then so was the ERG. So we've all got a responsibility to be positive, to get the best we can, not just for our own country, but for all of the countries that we work with and others, which is why I think the reduction in international aid is regrettable. There'd be a reduction anyway. It's a percentage-based contribution. I think it is regrettable, and it'll affect our soft power, and it leaves the door open to people like China to carry on racing across Africa and everywhere else, and having an influence that we're beginning to abandon. So I think we have a vested interest in that. It's not just to kind of do good. But other than that, it's lovely to be here, and the dialogue's fantastic, and well done for making it happen, Albert, and thank you for asking me to be part of it.
Thank you, John. And we're starting again tomorrow. I hope you'll be part of it too. Stephen.
Albert, thank you very much. So this is the first dialogue that I've participated in, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
That's the worst. Virtually. Next year, you'll come to Jerusalem.
I will.
When are we having it in Australia? That's what I want to know.
Next year in Jerusalem.
I can tell you the answer. The answer is that we did it in Australia in December 2009. And the federal and state governments that is the New South Wales, Victoria, and federal government, have spent such an amount of money in security that it was insane. I was embarrassed. And not only that, there were demonstrations in Sydney, there were demonstrations in Melbourne. We got broke out into the hotel. It was violent. The police
Oh
had
my God.
charge. It was not, I mean, I remember the whole event very fondly, except for those details. And that, and you know, to give you an example, John, anywhere we went, we had an armada of helicopters. It was
We're safer in Jerusalem.
in Jerusalem, it's all private security. We've got a couple of cars, one bus. It's all good. And that's why we're doing it there, because over there,
yeah. And we love the King David.
So that's the answer. Unfortunately, it's not a good one. I know.
Tony, Albert, next year, as Tony says, next year in Jerusalem, and very much looking forward to it. And I hope we'll be meeting in 12 months after what has been, I hope, a much better year for all of our countries and for the whole world than 2020 has been.
Absolutely.
Thank you, and I'd like to give Tony the opportunity to do his parting remarks.
Well, thanks, Albert. Thanks, Joan, and thanks, Stephen. Look, you're absolutely right, Joan. Optimism and confidence always beats pessimism and diffidence. And I think that one of my main roles is just to keep talking Britain up. I mean, let's face it, no country has had more influence on the modern world than Britain. When you think of the world's common language, the Industrial Revolution, the emancipation of minorities, the mother of parliaments, it's been an extraordinary contribution. And if there's one country that can stand firmly on its own 2 feet, it's Britain, dealing confidently and successfully with all of the other trading blocs and all of the other great powers. And I don't say for a second that it's all going to be plain sailing, because I fear that the EU still does have this instinct to make it tough for Britain, but it will pass. And Britain will be in control of its own destiny. And that's got to be a great thing for everyone.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone. And let's continue the discussion tomorrow.
Thanks, Albert.
Thank you.
Thank you.